coming to the United States of America is the final trauma. This is traumatic. You have to relearn everything. It's hard. It's the final trauma in someone's life. And I think we as a community can help lessen that traumatic experience of someone having to restart their life. And it doesn't mean they're not grateful to be here. It doesn't mean that refugees aren't happy to be here or happy to be safe. But I've never resettled someone who said I wanted to be in Alaska, because what they want is to be at home. They want to be at home, in the home they've always lived, in the schools they've always gone to, in the worship places they've always been. No one chooses to be a refugee. And so when you come here, while you are grateful, it is traumatic.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Alaska State Refugee Coordinator, Issa Spatrisano. Issa does her work through Catholic Social Services, Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services, which is the resettlement agency for the state of Alaska. RAIS, as it is commonly known, connects newly arrived refugees with housing, jobs, and other services that weave them into the Alaska community. To set a foundation for today's conversation about refugees, allow me to define a few terms. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her home because of war, violence, or persecution, often without warning. They are unable to return home due to unsafe conditions. Those who obtain refugee status are given protections under both international and U.S. federal law. An asylum seeker is someone who is also seeking protection from dangers in his or her home country, but whose claim for refugee status hasn't been determined legally. Asylum seekers apply for protection in the country of destination. In most cases, to qualify for help from RAIS, a person must have federal refugee status. There are many more folks in Alaska who need assistance than qualify for it. Today, on this episode, we are primarily talking about folks with refugee status. But as you will hear, that terminology is challenging because Alaska has had a recent influx of Afghan and Ukrainian refugees who do not have official refugee status. What will happen to them during the Trump administration is up in the air. Issa Spatrisano, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your early life. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the booming town of Kalkallen, Michigan, which is a real place, shockingly. Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Michigan and went to high school there, stayed in Michigan through college, went to college at Western Michigan University, graduated.
What did you study in college?
History, political science, and geography. And I triple majored history, political science, and geography, and minored in German. And I graduated from college and had plans to go get a PhD in modern European history. That was the goal. And my wife got into graduate school.
How'd you meet your wife?
We played college rugby together. So we met playing college rugby. She was a couple of years ahead of me, got into a master's program here at UAA. I said I could move to Alaska for 2 years. Anyone can do that for 2 years. I planned to apply for PhD programs where I was here. And then my life took a drastic turn. I ended up as an English as a second language instructor here in Alaska and ended up working in the refugee program and thought, maybe this is what I should do. And it's been over a decade.
What program were you teaching in?
I taught first at 9-Star as an ESL instructor, and then actually was working there. And the then director of the refugee program, Karen Ferguson, knocked on my classroom door and said, "Are you Issa?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I want you to come work at the refugee program. The students keep talking about you." And so I ended up working over at Catholic Social Services in the refugee program. And really the rest writes itself. I've done refugee services ever since. And so
what year was that? What year did you start with refugee services?
2011. 2010, I was an ESL instructor. 2011, I started working in the refugee program. Mm-hmm. I actually applied to PhD programs outside the state. We were going to stay only 2 years. We ended up staying forever because she ended up getting into the PhD program. Now she's works here as a neuropsychologist here in Alaska. But yeah, I had every intentions to leave and take off for graduate school, and actually ended up changing everything and work in the refugee program. I ended up going to UAA later to get my master's in education, teaching, and learning, really focused on adult education. Everything really switched by a happenstance of really getting a job. I did AmeriCorps my first year as an ESL teacher, and it really changed the way I saw the world. But it was a perfect match to actually everything I had studied and cared about. History, political science, geography, all of those things are at play in refugee situations across the globe. And if you want to to do work, you have to understand the factors that are contributing to what you're doing. And so it connected to all the things I really cared about and had studied in undergrad. But I grew up in a very small town in Michigan. There were no refugees in my hometown. There was really no diversity in my hometown. It was like a farming town in Michigan. Our high school mascot, I kid you not, is an ear of corn. At the football games, there was like a ear of corn running down the field. Yeah, so it was welcome to the cornfield where we played. So I lived in a really rural place. There's just not refugees, and diversity was not a big part of my story growing up. And so
were there
really
lesbians
Anchorage changed it.
Where you're growing up?
No, I don't know. I didn't know a single queer person. No, I did not know a single queer person growing up, especially in high school. When I went off to college, I played college rugby. I can tell you there's a lot of lesbians playing rugby. Now I know a lot of lesbians, but no, not when I was growing up, certainly no.
Did you know when you were growing up?
Yeah, I think like most adolescents know, but did I come out? No, I was raised in a super religious family. My parents are wonderful, supportive, great parents. I'm really lucky to have parents that are so loving and great. But
you have 3 kids?
I have 3 kids, yeah.
How old are your kids?
3, 2, and 1.
Wow. Those are little kids.
Yeah.
How's that going?
It's great. It's very busy.
Yeah.
It's very busy and very lovely. Yeah, it's very busy and very lovely.
Yeah. And do you guys feel comfortable in Anchorage?
Yes. Yeah. I think that Anchorage has its challenges like every place. But one of the things that I think I like about Alaska is it really is a live and let live environment. And I think that inside that live and let live is the space for people to find common ground with one another, because we are I don't want to get too involved in your life because I don't want you super involved in my life, right?
Libertarian.
Yeah, it's this libertarian-esque environment, but it prevents people, I think, from immediately saying you're different than me, so I'm not going to spend time with you. In fact, I think it in some ways makes us spend time with one another. And then I think when we spend time with one another, we start to realize whatever belief system we may have about another person may not necessarily be true down the road. I think I've seen that play out in my job over and over again, too. I am married to my wife with 3 young children, and I serve people from across the globe who have very different religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. And it's not a challenge. It's not an issue. They celebrate and hold and care for my children the same way I hold and care for their children. And I think that when we can step back from what our immediate reactions or belief systems might be and we spend time with people, it breaks down those barriers. I've seen that happen in my job over and over again in the many years I've worked there. And I supervise super diverse staff and have over time, or worked with super diverse community members. And
yeah, I want to ask more about that. I'll start by just sharing a story. When our son was about to go into kindergarten, we applied to the immersion programs, and he got into the Chinese immersion program and into the German immersion program, and they're about equidistant from our house.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why we chose German over Chinese is that I had a fear about the Chinese teachers maybe having an issue with 2 dads.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't think the Germans will have a problem with 2 dads. I just made a stereotype and was like, this is probably going to be an easier path for him to have 2 dads, is to go to the German immersion school rather than Chinese immersion school. I second guess every major decision that I make in my life. So there's many times where I thought we probably should have done Chinese. But I could see how, if I were in your shoes, depending on where someone was a refugee from, I might be a little bit more closed about being queer as opposed to with somebody from a different country. I definitely would be influenced by that.
Yeah, I think maybe that was true when I first started. I'll tell you a story many years ago when I first started, and it feels so long ago. When I first started working, I was the education and employment coordinator. So I coordinated all of education and employment services for the refugee program. And I was on a webinar that was put on by the technical assistance provider for the country. And they were talking about cultural orientation overseas. And this is the classes that refugees take right before they get on an airplane. It teaches them about travel. You're going to go on an airplane. This is what it's going to look like when you get to your home community. This is what you should expect. These are the resources that are going to be given to you. Preps people, right? And one of the people asked, what's the most common question you get in overseas cultural orientation? And I was the cultural orientation teacher here in Alaska. And the most common question at that time, this was probably 2013, 2014, was, what do I do if I meet a gay person? And this was for CO that's happening out of Africa. And at that time, we were predominantly resettling Somalis, Sudanese. This is the primary caseload of people I was serving. And I, of course, wasn't married at that time. You couldn't be married at that time legally yet. But I had moved here, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And I was like, all right, I can separate the two. I can do my job, and then I would leave my job and do a lot of advocacy for my community. At that time we were trying to pass Prop 5, the non-discrimination ordinance here in the municipality. I've worked a lot on that. We've done that as a community. And I was just like, all right, I'm just going to separate the two in my head. And my coworkers knew, but I wasn't like talking about it openly at work. Also, I have a job to do. It's not really whatever.
Well, what was the answer? When the refugees' question was, what do you do if you meet a gay person?
Yeah, the answer is always the same, which is America's a very diverse country. You're going to meet people from different backgrounds, just like you have rights. So too do others who live in the United States. And we often talk about that in culture orientation. On our side, you deserve to ride the bus like everyone else deserves to ride the bus. There's non-discrimination policies in the city. If something ever happens to you, you should come to one of us. That's how we've been able to live as a country in peace. Though we have diversity, different opinions, things have been politically charged, of course. We have relatively lived in peace, especially in comparison to refugee prolonged situations where some of these factors are why people have fled violence, right? And so we really talk a lot about that. And so that's what was said to them. And anyways, long story short, I heard it. I'm just going to separate the two. But my coworkers knew, but I had a really close coworker from Somalia. And when marriage equality first went to the Supreme Court, when Edie Windsor sued to just get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act.
It's so funny. I just have to throw this in here. I released a podcast today with Hollis French.
Oh, yeah.
And he asked for the name of the case prior to Obergefell v. Hodges, and I couldn't remember. Yeah. So thank you. Edie Windsor.
Yes. So Edie Windsor sues. It goes to the Supreme Court. I am a history political junkie. And so I had set my alarm clock so I could read the SCOTUS blog when all the cases were getting released. And so I had woke up that morning and I was like, oh my gosh, Jamie got overturned. Like maybe we will be able to get married someday because you probably like me spent many years thinking like marriage is not even a reality. That's just not something we'll ever have. And I was like, I can't believe they overturned it. It opens the door for a possibility. And so I had gone to work that day and I didn't say anything to anyone, but of course, like all my queer friends are like texting me or chatting with me about it. And anyways, I went over to the office and this gentleman from Somalia, Muslim, comes from a country where at the time and still, if you're queer in Somalia, it could be a death sentence, very serious. I was walking down the hall and he said Issa, and I turned around and I walked back towards him thinking he needed something. He wanted to ask me a question about a client or something. And he held out his hands to me, like both hands. And so I put my hand out to him and he held he put both of his hands around my hand and he said, I'm from a place where, discrimination and other things led to violence and warfare. And this country welcomed me here and has taken care of me and offered me different things. And my family is safe. And basically, today is an important day for your family because today your family is equal to my family. And that's important. And I was just I didn't expect it. I was so shocked by it. Here I am tracking something that's so important to me. I have no idea that my colleagues and I was not speaking openly about it. Like people knew who Jamie was, but it wasn't something being discussed. People weren't asking about Jamie. And I was like, thank you, totally floored by it and didn't know what to say to him. And I went out to my car and actually started crying. And I didn't cry because of what he had said to me. I actually cried because I think what you're referencing that you did with your son, I realized I had been doing to my coworkers, which is I don't want people to look at me as a queer person and make an assumption about who I am. And then say, because you're queer, you're this and this. And I had looked at every coworker in my office and said, because they're Muslim, they must think this. Because they're from this place, they must assume this. And I realized I had done to them what I never wanted someone to do to me, which was make this immediate biased judgment. Mm-hmm. And it changed my mindset. And I just thought, I have to give people a chance. Here I work in an office where we celebrate diversity every day. That's the core of the refugee program is people come here and we don't ask you to change to who we are. You come and you bring the strengths and the skills and the talents and your culture and who you are influences all those things, right? I'm good at my job because being queer does give me skills or experiences that make me see the world different. That is a benefit to me in the workplace, not a negative. And we celebrated that every other place. And it's not that my work wasn't telling me to celebrate. It's that I had said, oh, I'm not going to bring that to work. And it changed my mindset. And I just, from that point forward, I'm going to just answer the question honestly when people ask if I'm married, client, coworker. I'm going to celebrate when I have my kids. And now, I don't know, there's probably, I'm not telling people, but the word is out. Clients know. they tell one another. I just got stopped at the halal market by an Afghan family who was like, oh, like, you need to have more babies. And I was like, I already have 3. And they were like, no, you had 2. Your wife had 1. Mashallah. If you want to be married to a woman, that's fine, but you got to have more babies. Like, if you have 2 women, you can have at least 5 kids.
Oh my God.
And if we open the doors, I think we can see different things, but I'm showing up and helping them. They're seeing a different side of a person than they might have known before. And so I think it changed the way I view it. I think before that I did live with this concern,
well,
but I just don't have it anymore.
I will say that I think you and I share something, which is that I think that people often think we're gay. And my response is, if people make the assumption that I'm gay, they're right. They're very insightful. But the other quick story I wanted to tell, and it's actually a confession. So when I was working at the VA, I had just started working at the VA, and my husband and I had moved up from California at the beginning of 2017. The VA is a fairly conservative environment. And I'm so embarrassed about this story. I'm so horribly embarrassed because the person who is one of my best friends in the world today is in this story. There was an African-American social worker in the hallway, and she would come by my office and invite me to her office. And I didn't feel comfortable talking about gay stuff because I made assumptions about an African-American woman of a certain age not being very supportive of LGBTQ issues. Like, I just assumed that she was probably pretty religious and that she probably thought this was wrong. And I just didn't want that negativity in my life. And so I kept a distance. And I told her one day, I was like, hey, I don't normally like reach out to a 40-year-old Black woman because I just assume that you've got a problem with me. And of course, she was insanely offended. She's held it against me for years that I had this stereotype. But I think that as a self-protective mechanism, we make these assumptions about people, about who we can share ourselves with and who we can't. As time has gone on, I think we both have had similar experiences that the number of people who will be openly hostile to your face is infinitesimal. Most people treat you as a person.
Yeah. And also, I think one of the things I realized a long time ago is if I want to have my own mental health and my own dignity, then I have to be who I am, and I have to be who I am in all environments. And when you show up as who you are authentically in all environments, you're consistent. And when you're consistent, people know what they're getting. The good, the bad of that, but I'm consistent. I'm consistent in who I am as a parent. I'm consistent in who I am at the workforce. I probably am consistent in who I am as a community member. And so there's consistency in that. And if you can be consistent across all the spheres you're in, then at least you're predictable. At least you're predictable.
People know who you are.
People know who you are. And the more predictable you are, the more consistent you are, the more authentic you are, then people can see past an assumption. And so I think I try really hard to not make assumptions about others. Yeah, and there's self-preservation and safety. And there are things, especially with young children, I think a lot about that. And I had something happen to me in the community not too long ago. Somebody in a mega hat said, I was wearing a Pride hoodie and told me to take it off. There's nothing you have to be proud of, like sitting in a cafe, actually with somebody. And that's the first time I really had someone openly say something to me, and it bothered me. And also, I'm not going to not wear my hoodie. You know what I mean? So I think that, there's some safety things, and I worried a lot. What if my kids had been there with me? But I can't protect my children, just like my parents couldn't protect me. You know, what we can teach our kids is how to stand up for ourselves and how to live in the environment we're in. And
obviously my son's 11.
What more can you do?
We've been through this issue with friends in the neighborhood. When I ran for office, there were a couple of kids who were no longer allowed to play at our house anymore because they found out that we were a quote unquote Biden household, and they didn't want their kids exposed to Biden politics.
Instead of having discussions around what we believe and why we believe. I just want to raise kids where we can have discussions.
Right. And that's my son's grandmother, my mother, is voted for Trump 3 times. She's very proud of it. And he loves her. Yeah. So we have that conversation. It's very funny because that's a very important thing when he meets new people. If we're driving to meet people, he'll say, do they support Trump or Biden? And I say, it really doesn't matter. But just so you don't say the wrong thing, she voted for Trump. Back to Catholic Social Services. Yeah. So you were teaching English as a second language, and then they approach you to start in the refugee program. Yep. Tell us about Catholic Social Services refugee program.
Yeah, so Catholic Social Services Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services Program, RAIS, as it's called. RAIS started really in the late 90s, almost by accident, because we did not have a refugee assistance program. We didn't have a resettlement program here in the state of Alaska. Other states did. The refugee program across the country was established in the 1980s by President Carter.
Then it was 1980.
1980. He really did. Yeah, 1980. He signed the bill that became the start of the refugee program really bravely, really, it saved a lot of lives. So just thinking about him this week and his family, but he did something really important for the refugee program. Jimmy Carter really led the way, President Carter. But while the refugee program had been established across the country, Alaska did not have a program. And what ended up happening is Delta Junction ended up happening. Refugee arrivals from the former Soviet Union had made their way from Washington and Oregon and California and other places and had moved themselves to Delta Junction. Had family there, really saw it as a place they wanted to be. It was a small town rural community that was reflective of the home they had lived back home. And so all of a sudden you had all these refugees living in Delta Junction and no services for them. The state was not receiving federal dollars to serve refugees. And this group emerged, and so thus began the process of the federal government really going to the state and saying, you have refugees now living in your state. There are federal dollars that serve refugee populations, whether you resettle them or they come to your state, say as secondary migrants. Do you want to receive those federal dollars, open the door to that? And what happened at the time is that it was a very small population of people. It wasn't a large population of people. The state of Alaska opted out of the program, which is something states are allowed to do, which opens the door to a nonprofit stepping into the state role. We call that a replacement designee. It's when a nonprofit fills the role of the state administration. And Catholic Social Services was already doing immigration work at the time and working with many of those refugees to help them adjust their status. And so it was this natural marriage of they're already serving these populations. Maybe Catholic Social Services should do it. And Catholic Social Services began the official work in 2003, where they opened the doors as a reception and placement program. That's the brand new arrivals program that's through the State Department. And then also serving in this role of the replacement designee with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is where the federal funding comes from. And ever since then, CSS has administered both sides of the program, meaning they've been the replacement designee serving in the role of the state as the state opts out, and also as the primary resettlement program here in Alaska. So really, the program's over 20 years old now. And has changed a lot, especially in recent years with the higher numbers of arrivals. We've really changed the way the program works. But yeah, that's the basis of how it all started. So it's interesting. I think a lot of people think that we were like, we should bring refugees here.
Right.
But that's not what happened. Here. They came here and their families were going to follow them because that's what happens. And that's the story of Alaska, frankly, right? Like people come and people follow, and we have so much immigration into our state. Less in recent years, more out migration, but we have in-migration. We have people who come here, but that's what really started the program. It wasn't us saying we should welcome a bunch of people here.
The refugees were here, and basically Catholic Social Services stepped up to the plate and created a mechanism for us to be able to have access to these federal dollars to help these refugees that were already here.
Correct.
But we've continued to receive refugees.
Yes.
And are our numbers up, down, or steady?
So for many years of the program, we were consistent. And I would say all of that's really changed. With the first Trump administration through now, it's really been a totally different narrative. But for most of the years prior to that, really from 2003 to 2016, our numbers were steady. We received
what were they steady?
about
what was the steady
100 to 130, 150 arrivals a year. Those were mostly through the reception and placement program. That's that brand new arrivals program. We serve more than just refugees in our program. We serve anyone who's an Office of Refugee Resettlement eligible population, which is way too long to say, which is why we say refugees. But we can serve refugees, people who have received asylum, foreign-born victims of trafficking, which we have some of those cases. We can serve Cuban and Haitian entrants, a specific population under immigration law. And now with the newer regulations that have happened under the Biden administration, we can serve certain populations of Afghan humanitarian parolees and Ukrainian humanitarian parolees. So there are all these populations, and we really assess eligibility for all of those different populations are all eligible. So we have asylum walk-ins, people who have received asylum who get a referral to us from maybe an immigration attorney in town or someone who hears about our services and walks in. So at any given year, we were enrolling 100 to 150 people in all those different populations. In the first Trump administration, we saw numbers drop drastically as the resettlement program across the country declined. It wasn't Alaska numbers declining, it was the resettlement program declining. The president has the power to make what we call the presidential determination. Congress funds the program. That's the role of Congress, of course. And the president's role is to make the determination of how many people that president will admit in that given year. And historic averages are about 85,000, give or take. Some years,
seems
many
very
more.
small.
Yes, some years more. Like last year under the Biden administration, we had 125,000. In the last few years of the Obama administration, we were getting to about 100. Jimmy Carter, the first year, over 200,000 people came in the first year of the program. But it's been consistent across all different sorts of presidents through 40 years of a program. We've had a very consistent 85,000, which seems like a small number. It really is in comparison to the nearly 27 million people who are displaced and eligible for refugee resettlement. But 85,000 is no small shortage of work. It's a lot of work to bring those people here. Refugee screenings are the most intense screenings of any population that's coming to the United States, for sure. The screening process is very lengthy. It takes a while. There's a lot of governmental agencies involved. And so when you talk about 85,000, there's a lot of work behind that. And even the 125,000 last year was a huge success. And so...
And how does that translate to numbers in Alaska since 2016 to now?
So during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, major decrease in arrivals. We went from 80 to 60 to the last year of the Trump administration. And I will say COVID played into this too. It wasn't totally policy. In the very last year of the Trump administration, we only enrolled 20 new people.
Wow.
And then I will say things went totally the opposite end. We went from 20 people to 500.
Oh my God.
The following year. And Afghans had a lot to do with that. We resettled a number of Afghans very quickly. The withdrawal of Afghanistan happened. They put
2021.
2021, and they put a number of people on airplanes and used a program called humanitarian parole. It's a specialty immigration program under law that allows people to, in a humanitarian crisis, be resettled. And so not the traditional refugee resettlement program, but through this humanitarian program. And resettlement agencies did that work. And so we received over 100 Afghans in the span of a couple months. So what we would normally see in a year, we got in about 3 months here.
I encountered one of those families when I was door knocking when I was running for office the first time in 2022. It was, I think, 8 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and the son spoke good English, and he came out to talk to me and said that it was too crowded and that he was really upset. And I was a new candidate, tried to do a ton of doors. I've never forgotten that door. I didn't know how to follow up on it at that point. I hadn't been elected yet, but... Anyway.
Yeah, I'll say this. Alaska's too small to know what family you're talking about because that's how I know every case here. But I will say this. They weren't resettled through our program.
Okay.
A number of people came through a variety of different pathways. And there were Afghans we resettled, and there were a number of Afghans who had, not a number, but there was a small portion of people who were Afghans who already lived here who brought their family through other pathways.
Okay.
Unfortunately, when you do that, and you'll see this play out in our service provision here in the state. I know you talked to ALP last week.
I talked to ALP.
This is one of the examples of where there is challenges. If you qualify for refugee services, because we fund a number of entities, you get extra services, support, case management, all these other things. But if you came through a different pathway and you are not eligible for those services, you do not have access to the services that others have, because our state... As a legislator, you might be aware, you do not fund any sort of services. The state of Alaska doesn't fund any services for newcomers, for immigrants, for others. State of California does, state of Washington does, New York does. So other states have made that switch to level the playing field, where depending on how you came, there are resources for you. Here in the state of Alaska, if you aren't covered by our federal program, you're likely not getting those services. And we will often get phone calls about cases like that, or others who have come and said, can't you help them? And we are bound by federal law, and federal law is really specific who we can serve.
So the bottom line is, if they don't qualify for your services, they just don't qualify for your services.
They're qualified for potentially mainstream Alaskan services, but they may not, depending on their status. There are real loopholes. People may not be eligible for the mainstream benefits and services we expect the system to provide them. Medicaid, food stamps, TANF, right? And so depending on your
talked about this too, about being able to get a driver's license or even an ID card.
Yes.
And it's tricky. I think the assumption is that if you get a driver's license or an ID card, then this comes up a lot when talking about voting, is that then they would suddenly be able to vote. And if they're not a citizen, then they shouldn't be able to vote. And this gets into the whole fraud issue. But the bottom line is that people not having a valid photo ID really impedes their ability to get an apartment,
Correct.
to get a job,
Correct.
to do basic things in order to be a productive member of society.
Yes.
They are restricted by not being able to get a photo ID.
We all benefit by someone having a photo ID, and the people I resettle aren't eligible to vote. We do good education to ensure that they understand that voting can impact their long-term right to stay, their long-term citizenship goals, right? So if I vote when I'm not allowed to vote and I then go apply to be a citizen of the United States of America, that is not going to benefit you to that citizenship application. And people really, there's really no incentive. I want to be like, for the people who are making that argument, I serve this population directly. They have no incentive to vote. None. Because a vote, when they're not allowed to, denies them the right to stay long term. And I have yet to resettle someone who doesn't want to stay here in the United States long term, right? People are coming here to restart their lives. Their goal is to become an American citizen. Their goal is to contribute to this country. It does not benefit them to go and vote because that stops that goal. And so really, it's an interesting belief that I think perpetuates. I think I've gotten a lot of phone calls in recent years, as this has been something people have talked a lot about. And if people end up accidentally on the voter rolls, I can honestly say I don't actually know of any of them who have ever actually voted. We help them get off the voter rolls because we don't want them sitting on the voter rolls either. They would still have to account for that in the citizenship interviews. Of course, those are in green card interviews, all the interviews that you have to do for immigration. We don't want even people sitting on the voter rolls, but being on the voter rolls, let alone actually voting, we don't see that jump happen. This is the United States of America. I just want to get people once they're citizens to vote, and I sometimes can't get them to do it. So to think that there's this big incentive for them to go vote in elections now, it's not really happening. But an ID card, access to an ID card in an easy and simple way, whether you're eligible or not. The laws are quite complicated here in the state of Alaska. Even people who are eligible for ID cards, like refugees, sometimes go to the DMV and get denied their ID cards. And we have to go back multiple times to get them. It's a real pain.
This came up. I interviewed Tafilisa Noa Toliafoa, who's the director of the Pacific Community of Alaska.
Yeah, she's great.
She pointed out something that shocked me, but then at the same time, it shouldn't shock Alaskans, that people from American Samoa can't vote.
Yeah, they're nationals, not citizens.
But they're Americans. And so it's really
American nationals.
And prior to statehood, 1959, that's what we were in Alaska. And that was a major driver towards becoming a state, was so that we could vote. Yeah. It was taxation without representation. Yeah. Do you guys help Samoans, or do they don't qualify?
They don't qualify. Yeah. We are so bound by federal rules and regulations. The population we can serve is quite limited. My colleagues, and many of them, I of course know her, and I know Lori over at ALP, and now Topeka and Mara Kimmel, and like all of us are in the same circles because we all serve similar populations, AIJ, under the same similar umbrella of issues. And so really we want to work together and collaboratively, because really you're talking about what impacts this group is going to impact this group over here too. And when you look at all of those populations together, what's the difference between the people I serve and all the other populations? Resources. That's the difference. Federal taxpayer dollars come to the state of Alaska to serve refugees. That allows us to have an employment services providers, 3 distinct employment service providers across Anchorage that provide intensive employment services where they go to interviews with you, help you fill out the applications, problem solve on the job, provide interpretation on the job if needed. That level of service is why our employment numbers are really good and our job placements are high into good sectors where we're able to get people into welding jobs or airplane mechanic jobs. You don't see that service for others in the community because there's not the funding to do it.
Right.
Like, that's the only difference. Not the only difference, but that's one of the big challenges in our community is you often see these other gaps that knocking on the door of that family's house, or you see a family that's, they're like, I don't speak English well and I can't get a job, because there's not somebody doing what our service providers do at Catholic Social Services and other organizations we fund, like New Chance and Project Alaska. They're going with you to the interview. They're helping you on your behalf. They're helping you fill out a W-2 for the first time. That's not easy. What's this tax document? What do I fill out? How does it work? They ask for my right to work documentation. What does that mean? We can explain to them. It means show them this and show them this and show them this. And those really low-hanging services, and I call them low-hanging because they're actually not that hard, when unfunded, really hurts us as a state. Because you have a lot of people, I'm telling you, sitting in this state right now who are underemployed or unemployed, not because they don't have skills, but because there's a difference between being able to do a job and knowing the system to get a job. Those are huge gaps, right? If I was in another country, I may not be able to get in a job. Doesn't mean I don't have the skills to do a job, but I might not know the system to do it. And at Catholic Social Services, because we have these federal dollars, we can provide these robust services. And they're quite robust. We do a lot of services out of Catholic Social Services to serve refugee populations.
My understanding is that our system is extraordinarily complicated. And I will just share that I lived in Estonia for 3 years, and I actually had like the equivalent of a green card. I had a photo ID card that allowed me to work in Estonia. And it was like an application in 30 minutes at like their immigration office. And they give me the ID right there. Yeah. And I can walk out the door. The bottom line is that I had to have an employer. Like basically it's like the employer is my sponsor. The employer is saying that this person can do a job that maybe we don't have enough Estonians to do. Yeah. You get it. And so I have this other perspective that it could be a simple process, as simple as an employer saying, we need this refugee to do this job because we don't have enough local talent to do this job.
Yeah, I think there are immigration programs like that are set up in the United States. Alaska's using them a ton. Look at our public schools. Yeah. Had they been more reliant on foreign-born teachers? Yes. I mean, our healthcare system relies on it.
So just for folks to understand that what are they called? J-1 visas?
J-1 visas,
that are from the Philippines.
Yeah, H-1B1 visas are used a lot.
That are basically saving the day for our remote Alaskan schools.
You would not have teachers if you didn't have
You would not have teachers.
The difference here, not the difference, but I think one of the biggest factors here that we don't necessarily see in another country like Estonia is that very high price point to get that immigration services, because our system is so complicated that you're talking about a lot of dollars that need to go to immigration attorneys to make sure paperwork is filed correctly and in the right way in a system that's very complicated. And Alaska lacks enough immigration attorneys really for the need of the work that's here.
Right. Well, and that's a problem. I was thinking off the top of my head. I was like, I didn't need an attorney in Estonia.
You do need one here. And one could argue you don't. But we routinely tell people the risk of making a mistake that can harm you for a lifetime, is not always worth taking. And that's even in really cut and dry, easy cases, right? USCIS is a complicated organization. And immigration law, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, is a complicated... There's a lot going on. And immigration law is so complicated. I'm not an immigration attorney. I know enough to scratch the surface to help navigate simple situations, but immigration law is complicated in this country because really as a country, we haven't dealt with it for a long time. We really have been putting Band-Aids on a problem for a very long time. And so you have so many different pathways and so many different options and so many of this, all of which, if you have resources and wealth, you may find a way through. And if you don't have those things, you are unlikely to find a way through. And again, wealth doesn't mean skills and talent. Wealth just means resources. And so all the time I encourage, even in our refugee populations where we do have resources for them, and they do have much, much more simple pathways forward. Refugees do. Our Ukrainians do not right now. There's a lot to be said about what will happen with Ukrainian status. They're not refugees. The Ukrainians who live here in Alaska, most of them are on this different status, this humanitarian status. And we will have to see what the Trump administration does. And that will change Alaska overnight. There are over 1,000 Ukrainians living in the state working in essential jobs. And the decision made on the federal level will affect our state. It will affect our state and all those families that are here about whether they get to stay or not. Those are things we have to wait and see. So immigration law is so complicated. It's very complicated.
So you had 500 that first Biden year.
Yep.
And then what have the numbers been in the last 4 years?
Pretty consistent. 500 to 450 for every kind of year.
Which are your biggest years ever.
Yeah. These are the biggest years in the state's history.
So questions about that. And I tried to ask it, Lori and Deepika from Alaska Literacy Program. Do people get assigned to Alaska or do people choose Alaska? And I would just guess that if I were a refugee from any place south of here, that I'd probably want a warmer state.
Oh, that's a bad assumption, Andrew, because the largest Somali population lives in Minnesota.
That's
In
so
this country.
interesting.
And the largest
Ilhan Omar.
population of individuals from the Middle East live in Metro Detroit area in the globe. So weather does not determine, I think that's something on a surface level we think a lot about, but think about the refugee experience. You have, over the course of many years, because most refugees are displaced for about 17 years before resettlement. That's the average wait times. You have been fleeing whatever the core trauma was in your country, whatever sort of happened, through multiple other places. And through that, we can imagine many heinous and challenging things have happened to you and your family, because that's just the reality of a refugee experience, right? And when you get the opportunity to resettle, of course, people think a little bit about weather, but really they're asking these core questions. Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be able to get a job and provide for my family? Are my kids going to be able to go to a school that feels safe, where they're going to have opportunity? And those are really the things people think about. And sure, do I see refugees from the Congo in our office who are like, this place is crazy. Like, get me out of here. But I also see them here 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, because what they found in Alaska is safety. And what they found here is a place where they think their children have opportunity.
And we certainly need workers. So
I think that, one, to go back to the original question, sometimes you get to choose and sometimes you don't. It has a lot to do with how you came. So if you come through the traditional reception and placement program, which is the brand new arrivals program, then for refugees, then there's really one factor that determines, one of the first questions they ask is, are you what we call a family tie, meaning you have family? Or are you a free case of people with no families? If you are a family tie, the State Department will prioritize placing you where your family is already located, and that's immediate family.
And I would just guess that's what happened with Minnesota and Detroit, is that you had like a core immigrant group, and then through family ties, that community just grew, and it's like...
Through family ties and secondary migration. Don't we all want to look around and have access to the things that one of the number one reasons that I'll tell you our Muslim families leave is because there's not a Quran school here. And that's religiously important to their families, culturally important to their families. And so they reach a point where they think, I want my child to be able to go to school and study the Quran. And that doesn't exist here in Anchorage, but it does in Minnesota, and it might in Metro Detroit.
Like, I'm not an expert on this, but they should be able to read the Quran in the original language, which, I mean, is something that I guess bar mitzvahs, like Jewish people do. Christians don't really try to read the Bible in the original language. I would just say, so it requires special schooling.
Yeah, special schooling. And there needs to be a special imam who's trained in it, right, or someone who's a teacher in it. And when you start to have people gather in a place, what gathers around them are your cultural, religious, community safety nets, the things we all search for in our communities, right? And so you do have pockets across the country. Like, there's a lot of Burmese people living in Indiana. What happened is a group of people went there, and yeah, family ties came. But then what started to happen is probably religious communities started to develop and support systems. And now you're raising young children outside of your culture, and you think, I'd like my kids to be able to speak the language, and I'd like them. So you move to where the population is. This is why, if you go anywhere in the globe, there's neighborhoods and pockets of communities that develop. Chinatowns exist, or other sort of towns like that exist, because people are naturally drawn to an environment in which they're surrounded by people who believe what they believe, live the life they live, are from the cultural groups there. Even our core community has done this, right? There's a reason there's boys' towns in Chicago. And
yeah, for sure. I was thinking about Anchorage, though.
This is what makes Anchorage really different than lots of other states, is we do not have a dominant population here. We really don't. Why is Mountain View the most diverse zip code in the country? For years, we talked about that. Why? Because we don't have enough of one population to let people isolate into a specific part of town. And so instead, you have that diversity spilling into like certain neighborhoods, and it's all the different populations together. And there's real beauty in that. I've watched that in the resettlement program. You know, we have a Burmese community here, and most of them had one religious belief, kind of Christian, and we had a Rohingya Muslim Burmese family and a smaller group of Rohingya Burmese families. And so we had predominantly one group, and then we had a couple Rohingya families. And they would have these Burmese community celebrations. And when they would have them, they would have all the Burmese come together, because they're all Burmese. And then they would have two different services. One where they would do like they were predominantly like a sector of Christian, like a specific kind of Christian. They would do their ceremony, and then they would make space and wait for the Muslim community to do what they wanted to do. And they would do it in one space together. And we saw the same thing with the Bhutanese community when they were here, really recognizing that we are one group of people with different beliefs. And when you have 500,000 people in a community, you don't need to have that sort of environment. You can parcel yourselves out. But I think that's some of the beauty of Anchorage is that our populations who are so diverse are coming together and finding commonalities because we do seek to have one another. We seek to have people around us who are similar to us. And we see that with our Muslim communities here, right? Sudanese, Somalis, people from Egypt are all together.
Has there been any attempts to start a Quran school?
I think there's been lots of attempts at it. I think that the mosque here, they built a beautiful mosque not too long ago, but there's a beautiful mosque in South Anchorage. Very busy. I don't know if they had a great event last year. I hope they'll do it again. They have a wonderful imam who really started a couple of years ago there. And they opened the mosque up for a day for people to visit. And they had great activities outside for people to learn about Islam. And if people are hesitant to go into places of religious communities of which they don't participate, there's this like, I'm not going to understand what's happening, or I don't know what the way to act is, or it's not a place for me. And they had this great open house for people to go. So I hope they host that again in future years. Really wonderful. They had a table with hijabs where women were talking about why they wear a hijab, what it means to them, letting other people put hijabs on and see them, allowing people to walk into the mosque to see the different ways it's set up. Men are traditionally on the floor and women are up in a balcony.
Right.
And I feel very lucky. I always say this, I'm a lucky person because I work in a job where I have spent time in the mosque and I spend time in temples, being asked to go to different services for the Jewish community, because if you want to talk about the root of the refugee program, it's tied to the Holocaust. It matters to their community. That's why we have a refugee program in this country. Really, in the globe, it's why the program exists, because there was a response after World War II that said we had no way for people to flee.
We have a Hindu temple in Anchorage, correct?
Yes, we have all these different religious communities, and I've just been the lucky person who's been invited to some of these things. And so I get exposure to that. But again, it goes back to that when we see different things, that lessens the fear. I think fear is grounded in misunderstanding. And the more we put ourselves out there, our clients have to do this every day. They have to put themselves out there. Refugees put themselves out into this community to learn new things. I encourage all my American citizens or people who are born here, put yourself in an uncomfortable position, know somebody, meet someone from another community, sit in a house where everyone around you is speaking a different language and sit in it and enjoy the beauty of that and understand what that feels like and eat a meal with people who are eating different food than you're eating, and you're potentially eating something you have no idea what it is. I've sat in so many kitchens and eaten so many things I have no idea what I've eaten. And it's an experience. It's a cultural experience. And in that you get to see the beauty of other people. And it's very easy to not do that. It's very easy not to.
I just thought of it. So I actually lived in Saudi Arabia as well. And just for the record, getting my work permit there was very straightforward and simple as well. Yeah. It's just crazy. And also, I'll just say that I worked in Finland using my Estonian green card. So they were hiring Estonians and they hired me as an Estonian, and they had a special relationship with that country. There's other models for how to give people permission to work here that don't require attorneys. I'm sorry, I keep harping on that, but it's just like asking people to pay for an attorney who are the least likely people to be able to afford an attorney.
Yeah. Yes. And at the end of the day, it doesn't help us economically. I think when I started in resettlement, we weren't in this position. I mean, I worked in employment services really early in resettlement in 2011, 2012. It was harder to get people jobs back then. The economy of Alaska was really booming. There were a lot of people here. The jobs were a little bit more competitive. Now we have employers begging us for employees. It's really a different environment than it was back then. And I think the state is losing population, especially working age population. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And I don't want to get into all of those, but I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But I also do think that refugees and other populations like refugees can be part of our solution, because you are bringing in workforce with skills and talents. And the immigration processes they have to go through are time consuming and other things. But we see employers come back consistently and say, do you have more people that can work here? Do you have more people that can work here? Because they're good, hard workers and they're aiding our state. they're aiding our state. It's a positive. And I think the rhetoric has been so turned up in such a way that, especially here, one of the benefits of Alaska, I'm not from here, right? I grew up in the Midwest. One of the benefits of Alaska in the many years I've been here is that Alaska prides itself in Alaska, right? We're very like, look at our federal delegate. How much time do they spend just saying Alaska, Alaska?
Right.
I mean, just there's something about this place where we want to be different than the US. We want to be in our own. And I think that federal rhetoric or the national rhetoric that's happening on immigration is starting to bleed into Alaska. And when Alaskans can step back and say what's good for Alaska and tone down the national rhetoric on this, I think we would actually all come to the table on a better understanding. Because I have talked to people on both sides of the aisle. And when you talk about economy, people have the same opinion, frankly. Both sides want robust economies for the state of Alaska. Both sides understand that is good for the state and necessary. Both sides understand we need to build infrastructure in this state. And you need skilled labor to do it. And I have Ukrainians who are skilled laborers.
Right.
I have Afghans who served with the U.S. military, who flew aircraft. They're a skilled
in the interview with
labor.
Lori and Deepika, they talked about the skilled immigrant gap,
Yes.
where you've got immigrants who are very well trained, have advanced degrees. They struggle with English, which puts them at a huge disadvantage. But not only that, but like just getting permission to work, period, is a barrier.
Yeah. And for my populations, luckily those barriers are lessened because they have legal everyone we serve is on a very clear legal pathway. To employment. I wouldn't say to citizenship, but to employment. And even then, the systems to get into major corporations in this country, the navigations of HR departments. Providence is a wonderful employer, and they run a great job training program for refugee populations that they do with us, an internship program. It's great. It's so successful. I'm sure Providence would praise it just like I am. And getting through Providence HR, even when you have a specialized program made,
it's challenging.
2 months, 3 months, 4 months. It's just, this is...
And getting a job at the VA takes 6 months.
Yeah.
Those of us who English is our native language and we have college degrees, we struggle to fill out the paperwork and get things done in a correct way so that we can start a job.
Yeah. And while you're waiting for that really good job, we see this with Providence. Families are like, I can't wait 3 months. I have to pay my rent now. And so they go and get a dishwashing job or a housekeeping job, and they don't want to leave that employer to then end up getting this more stable job. And so when you talk about stability, when you talk about jobs that give us, all of us, this opportunity to have some stability, better benefits, all these things, there is some privilege associated with the ability to wait for that job.
Right.
It takes
100%.
resources. And resources are few and far between in the resettlement program, because let me tell you, the refugee resettlement program isn't easy. It's very hard. You come here. I always tell people this. You come here as a refugee, and one of the first things we tell you is, welcome to America. You are in debt. Because your flight here is a loan.
Really?
The refugee program flight is a loan, and you owe that money back starting 3 months into your resettlement. This is not an easy program. I think I talk to a lot of people who maybe aren't so supportive of the program. When I start to talk about the realities...
Well, because they get the handout. They think we're spending all this money on refugees and, must be nice to just have the U.S. government just throwing money at you.
It's not like that. It's very challenging. Refugee cash assistance, which is the cash assistance program people are eligible for here in the state of Alaska and across the country. Refugee cash assistance rates. And I share this information because I think it really puts into light what people are challenged with. If you're a single person, your cash assistance benefits are $537 a month. And that is supposed to cover all your bills.
That's how you end up with 8 people living in one apartment.
That's the money you are given.
Yeah.
Yes, that is helpful, but I don't know anyone who can live now in Anchorage on $537 a month and pay their rent and have access to other resources that they need. And so really people arrive here, and the first thing we say to them is, welcome to Alaska. We're so glad you're here. And you needed a job yesterday. And we get to work to find people jobs.
Do refugees who say land on December 31st and stay for a full calendar year qualify for the PFD?
Yes. If you're a refugee or an ORR eligible population, with the exceptions of our Afghans and our Ukrainians, which we've been dealing with the state on really what the determination of those populations are, because they're not in the original 1980 Refugee Act. So the original 1980 Refugee Act had refugees, asylees, foreign-born victims of trafficking, Cubans, and Haitian entrants. These populations, when Alaska passed the PFD, they passed those same populations of eligibility in.
But because Ukrainians and Afghans have a different status.
And their status has come much later.
So we need to amend that?
It's been a constant discussion between the two parties of if they're eligible or not. And we've worked with a number of legislators to try to get this resolved and with the PFD office. And I think the final determination clearly was until they have a permanent status, they can apply. And if they adjust to those statuses, they can then get back payments.
Okay.
And so it's been an ongoing kind of question. Are they eligible or not? It's not clear. And it's been the last 3 years of trying to figure that out. But refugees definitely are. Asylees definitely. Once you're an asylee, you've been approved for asylum, definitely are. And we do apply for PFDs.
Just a few weeks ago, when I interviewed Lori and Deepika, they were reluctant to talk about the incoming Trump administration and the promise of massive deportations, and how that was adversely affecting the community that they serve, just because the tension is so high and there's so much stress. And but listening to Elon Musk, who is an immigrant, talking about the need for skilled workers and the need to preserve certain types of statuses of visa, I feel already we're seeing that the millions of deportations may not happen exactly the way it was initially promised. I don't know, just speaking from your perspective today, are you pessimistic, optimistic, just agnostic?
Yeah, I've worked in the refugee resettlement through, at this point, Obama, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, now back to a Trump administration. So I've worked in the program in multiple sorts of administrations, and all administrations view the refugee program different. And that refugee program is even viewed differently outside of the immigration, right? Immigration is like
a separate.
That's such a huge term, right? So immigration is huge. And then you look at just the refugee program. Every administration has a different approach, really. And all of those approaches affect the local community. And all of government is really dependent on one another. So what happens at the federal level affects the state. What happens at the state level affects local. And really things play out in local communities, much more than we really talk about like locally. And so I try to in the refugee program, when we talk to our clients and when I go out into the community and speak, I often talk about local. And I always say resettlement is local because really it is local. 95% of people's lives, frankly, 95% of my life, no offense to my state representative, but 95% of my life has really nothing to do with the state. It really is about my local community. And our lived experience has a lot to do with what we do here.
And your neighbors bringing you a cake and making you feel welcome is infinitely more valuable
than what's happening in national rhetoric.
Yes.
So you can be somewhat protected from national rhetoric. And I've seen that across administrations. Like while the Trump administration categorically changed the refugee program by lowering numbers, and there were real challenges to that, and we saw families not get to be reunited, and there was pain and heartache in that, we also saw a community step up and say, not on my watch. Welcome to the place I live in. We're so happy you're here. And so almost in some ways, people were sheltered from what was happening on the federal level. And so what I'll say is in my concern for what's about to come, I also have a lot of optimism about what's to come, because I do think that all of us as community members, it can be easy to ignore something when we don't have to look at it. And then when we start to hear about it, there is this sort of people come out of the woodwork, people who say, not on my community, not in my state. This isn't who we are, right? And that's one thing. Policy affects everything. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not like, oh, don't worry about the policies.
Right.
I worry a lot about the policies. It's my job to worry about the policies. I'm our state refugee coordinator. I should worry a lot about federal policy. But I do think that being transparent and telling the people the truth about when we know it, not going out right now into our communities and getting people scared.
Because you don't know.
We don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It's not going to benefit them. But when we do know something and it does affect them, being transparent and honest with them, talking about other solutions, going to our state and local when there is something that can be done here to help, advocating for those things. And so I think my fears are also comforts, because I find that in my many years here doing resettlement, and I've worked here and I worked in Kansas City when my spouse had to do her practicum. She was placed in a VA, actually in Topeka, worked in the VA in Topeka. That what I've seen in all of those situations is community rally around a group of people and say, on a local level, no, not here, not where we are. And that hurts the people who need to come. The 27 million people who are displaced, if they close the doors to coming to this country, those who are not here are not getting in. And there's pain and heartache for that because there are family members sitting here in this state of Alaska who want their family members here, and we would all want that. But I really watched people who were here in Alaska find unlikely allies over and over again in different administrations. And even in years of like super high resettlement, you do not go from resettling 20 people to 500 people with the success Alaska did without Alaskans. Catholic Social Services did not do that alone. Do not get me wrong. We did that because when I said, oh my gosh, there's 113 Afghans coming in 3 months and I need beds and I need furniture and I need pots and pans and I have to pick them up from the airport and I need apartments and I need food for those apartments. And there's so much work to be done. Hundreds and hundreds of Alaskans showed up and said, I will be a part of the welcoming. And we had hallways full of new Amazon packages. And instead of having to panic and worry about where we were going to buy pots and pans, I just had to walk down the hall and grab them. And when we needed food to fill refrigerators, we had a member of the Juneau community go and get specialty spices that are like inherent to Afghanistan, like the spices traditionally used in Afghan cooking, and send us individual spice packs for each home so that when people came, the spices they used were in their kitchens. That's like such a level of thoughtfulness that like we as service providers couldn't have done because we're just like, we got to pick people up from the airport and put them into housing. And that was the community. The community did that. And I've watched that happen over and over again. So I know who Alaskans are at their heart. And I think when we can turn down the national rhetoric, like I said, and focus on the beliefs we have, doesn't mean that there aren't Alaskans who aren't super supportive of the program. I talk to them on the phone too. But I think we usually often find common ground. It's unusual I hang up the phone with someone who called me that disagreed with me, that we hang up angry. We hang up as agree to disagree. Mm-hmm. And like the thing you really care about, it's often veterans issues or other things. I'm like, I don't want a veteran on the corner in my community. I don't want that. I don't want that either. I want the same things you want. And I also don't think that one is taking away from the other.
If people are listening to this and they're like, I love this organization, I didn't know anything about it. Are there volunteer opportunities? Are there opportunities to order those Amazon packages? Are there opportunities to donate?
There's tons of ways people can help. Catholic Social Services, of course, has Refugee Assistance and Immigration Services. They have a number of volunteer opportunities. They're resettling new families now. They have a number of new cases coming in December and January. They need all the things I just talked about in their homes. You can go on the CSS website and you can see all the different items that could be donated. New Chance, Ukraine Relief, which is a new organization that started as a result of the Ukrainians that arrived. They also do reception and placement. They have new families coming through the RNP program. You could reach out to them. I know they have volunteer opportunities and items that they need donated. Every family needs food in their fridge. We have meals teams that you can sign up, and you can just go, when you go grocery shopping, buy a little bit of extra so that when families come, that food is sitting in their fridge. Those are all ways to help. If you're a landlord and you have an apartment, we're asking landlords to let us have access to an apartment before the case arrives. I know this is a big ask, and yet we have landlords who do it for us all the time. If you have an apartment and that's like something you want to do, we always need apartments so that people can have a place to live. Ideally, we pick you up from the airport and take you to your home.
That's awesome.
And Alaska has done that consistently. We don't put people in hotels. You get to walk into your apartment. That makes you feel so much better than being like, I'm going to put you in a hotel a couple nights while we figure it out. And so there's ways to help. Volunteer-wise, you can be a family mentor. We have a youth mentoring program for youth 15 to 24 who get matched with a mentor who help them navigate, especially that transition from high school to college. My refugee parents, as much as they love their children and want to support them, they've never filled out a FAFSA. They've never filled out a FAFSA. They don't know what that is. We have students who may be studying nursing. We try to match them with a nurse here in town who may be able to help them with their studies. We have students studying engineering who are matched with math tutors. So if you're interested in being a youth mentor, there's a program for that. We have a robust farm agricultural program. If people haven't been and seen that, FIG, Fresh International Gardens, operates now we just built a 8,000 square foot new garden in Mountain View over in McPhee Park in cooperation with a USDA grant that we did with the municipality, actually. So we just opened a brand new garden over there right next to the old garden that was there. So added more growing space plus Grow North Farm. That agricultural program, we have people who come out and volunteer in the farm. And that's great for organizations. If in the summer you have an organization and you want like a volunteer group activity, you want to close your office for 4 hours and come do some work, reach out to us. We'd love to host you. It's a great way to give back, and it's nice to be out in the garden and see that program. That's a program we're really proud of. That's really done a lot. It's the largest, those are the largest growing spaces in all of Anchorage. are operated by refugee entrepreneurs and farmers.
Awesome. And the best way to contact you guys is through the website?
Yeah, cssalaska.org, and then you can find really all the information there about the organization and the ways to participate, and always up-to-date facts. My contact information is there. I really mean it. I'm not just saying it. I believe my role as the state refugee coordinator is to answer questions and to go and show up at places and talk about the program. And if not me, other people from my office. And if people ever have questions or say, my group wants to know a little bit more about this, or you want us to come speak, I will go anywhere, because I always say, if the only thing I ever do is make refugee services culturally competent and accessible in my office, I have essentially failed. People spend 99% of their lives outside of our office. So it's really about our community. And our community is the grocery store, and our community is our schools, and our community is all these other places. So really my job is to leave my office and go make sure that as a state and as a community, we are prepared as possible to welcome people. And so I will go anywhere. I'll talk to anybody, because I think that's my job. And if we don't do that, then we're really not preparing the local community for successful resettlement.
Last question I ask folks is if you have a book to recommend.
This is a book that was written many years ago, and I still think it's one of the best written books. The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Is that the title? The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. It's a story.
By Anne Fadiman.
It's a really great book in the sense that I think it lets people understand really the sum of what I'm talking about. It follows a Hmong family where a child has epilepsy. And it's really the challenge between this family and the medical system, and how the medical system really thinks they know the answer, and they're really not listening to the family's cultural beliefs, and what ends up happening to this family and to this child. And neither side was totally right. And that really, if we want a community that celebrates different beliefs, different systems, different ways of knowing, and I think it's especially good for medical providers to read, or school district employees to read, or other people who work in the helping side, to understand that we really need to listen. We need to authentically listen to what people are telling us, instead of assuming that when a parent says, I don't want to give my child with epilepsy this exact medicine, that it's not because they don't care about their child, or it's not because they don't want what's best for their child. It's because we need to spend more time talking to them and spending time with them and understanding their cultural beliefs. And so this follows a Hmong family in California as they try to navigate a complicated medical system with a child. And so it's an old book. It's been around a really long time.
1997. It's not like ancient.
But it's
and
also
it won the National Book Critics Award.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal in that year.
Yeah, it's a book that I think really has held on to that story. It really does a good job of telling the story. And there's a lot of books about refugee experiences that are also worth reading. But what I like about this book is I think people think of the U.S. as the final destination, and we forget that we are also a trauma. Coming to the United States of America is the final trauma. This is traumatic. You have to relearn everything. It's hard. It's the final trauma in someone's life. And I think this book shows a good job of showing how we as a community can help lessen that traumatic experience of someone having to restart their life. And it doesn't mean they're not grateful to be here. It doesn't mean that refugees aren't happy to be here or happy to be safe. But I've never resettled someone who said I wanted to be in Alaska, because what they want is to be at home. They want to be at home, in the home they've always lived, in the schools they've always gone to, in the worship places they've always been. No one chooses to be a refugee. And so when you come here, while you are grateful, it is traumatic. And I think the book does a good job to really say that when you're in that situation, and you walk into a medical facility or into a school district, I think what people think is fight is actually families trying to hold their ground and hold their cultural beliefs and try to find place and belonging. And I think as service providers, we've improved, I think, over time to really understand, cultural competency, but it's a place we can all grow all the time. I think the book's really good for people to see that picture and think about their own approaches that they might be using in the field they're working in.
Issa Spatrisano, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're welcome.
I have dropped a link in the show notes to RAIS's website. Find out about ways that you can help Alaska's refugee population there. I've also dropped a link to the podcast interview from a few weeks ago with Lori Pickett and Deepika Ramesh Peramal from the Alaska Literacy Project. That organization helps folks of all immigration statuses who need help learning English and navigating Anchorage. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.issa@rfug.org. email.andrew.gray@ahileg.gov or call 907-269-0123.